It's nothing like super secret squirrel type stuff. But essentially the idea was that we take these guys which function like athletes and we start to add in programming, mental health, things like that. And that's really what this presentation is about. Not so much the Smartabase side of things. We're only into Smartabase about 2 or 3 weeks at this point in terms of opening the system up. But we have done a lot of work with apps and wearables that I'll get into with you guys. And this is the first time I've been able to see a presentation in the back of the room too, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, it's high tech. So an overview, I'll go into the background, both the history of the program we work with and then our kind of story at the 48th. Some of the goals we had early on with the shortfalls, the landscape of our kind of software ecosystem, a couple of the lessons we learned dealing with tactical athletes, and then what our future looks like now that we're sort of up to speed with Smartabase. So real quick at a high level, the War on Terror, as you guys all probably know, started around 2001. And approximately 10 years later, they really looked at the force on the special operations side, anecdotally, and figured out that these guys were having a lot of incidents with TBI, suicide, stresses at home, some performance issues. And they started a program that has a glorious acronym, POTIF, which is Preservation of the Force and Family. And what that essentially functions as is sort of a Division I athletic view of the tactical athlete and all that entails. So that's the high level view. For us at the 48th, I showed up about 4 years ago. I was the first person there as the strength and conditioning coach. I also was the sort of de facto nutritionist, the shoulder to cry on, the psych doc. We finally added to the team about a year later with an athletic trainer and a sports medicine doc. And then about a year after that, we stood up as essentially in the Air Force what's called a flight with an active duty physical therapist. So our team right now is pretty full up in terms of specialists. And then on top of that, luckily enough for me, we expanded our training facility in our gym by about 6,000 square feet to accommodate my guys. So on a daily basis, depending on where we're at, I interact with between 75 and 100 active duty guys. That fluxes obviously during the year, depending on deployments and training and things like that. But this is sort of a misconception of what people think when we talk about military training. They think that we're, squirting them with hoses, dunking them underwater, making them get wet and dirty. This is more of an in-doc sort of perspective. For us, it looks more like this. That's our facility with a beautiful black and white filter over it. Like I said, we pump about 75 to 100 guys through that each day, split into 3 different teams. One other thing that we like to do down in the bottom right is take some of the gym-based skills that we do, so the more gym-based performance stuff, and look at it out in the field. So in this particular case, we took the assault bikes out to the shooting range, and we were looking at what happened to accuracy at different levels of metabolic conditioning. So stuff like that where we get creative, where we take the stuff that the guys do actually in the facility and go out into the field so they can see sort of how that plays into what they do on a daily basis. We call it kind of the cool guy training, and they have a lot of fun putting on their outfits and getting out the guns. So early on, so again, probably 3 or 4 years ago, some of the shortfalls that we had, and these are only 3, we had quite a few, but in terms of technology, we have a pretty high operational tempo, and that created a lot of discontinuity, whether that's, we're here for a week, we're gone for 6 weeks sort of thing. And early on, we were using pencil and paper, Excel, stuff like that. So we knew we needed to find either one or multiple different solutions to more or less fill the gaps. You'll see as I go through this that sort of started in the gym and then expanded outward as we look towards rehab, nutrition, sleep, things like that. The other shortfall, and this is kind of across the board from a military perspective, is that these programs aren't mandatory for these guys. So there is an element of salesmanship. There is a little bit of buy-in that has to be created because, quite frankly, if the guys don't want to do this stuff, they won't do it. And that kind of goes back to those misconceptions here where people often think that because these guys are in the military, they'll do whatever we tell them to. And at our level, it's very much the opposite. If I tell them to do something, they're more likely not to do it just because I asked them to do it. So we have to add that little element of salesmanship, and that kind of breaks down for the technology into things like visuals, engagement, colors. I've been giving Marcus a hard time. I'm going to steal the cartoon pictures from their Smartabase because I think it'll get the guys more involved with what we're trying to do. Another shortfall we had, the goal there, as I kind of touched on, is to create what we're calling an athlete mindset. So one issue we have with our guys is that they don't really consider themselves athletes. And we use the term tactical athlete a lot kind of in our own circle. But the guys themselves don't really make the connection between what they do and how they recover and how they sleep to their actual performance in kind of a battle space. So one kind of push that we've had lately, especially with a lot of the software, is to try to get them in this mindset of, the things I do outside of the gym, when I get home, when I go to bed, that stuff all kind of plays into this sort of idea of this tactical athlete. And then finally, another big shortfall we had across the space was a lack of a unified system. So again, with Smartabase, for us, that sort of solved that problem in terms of the things that we send up and out, which really for us gets as high as the Pentagon and Congress when we're looking at the money being spent on these programs and how we're justifying our positions there. So right now, this is our sort of current landscape in terms of apps and wearables, top to bottom, and I'll go through all these: Train Heroic, Whoop, and Fusionetics. We do have another one that we're sort of beta testing right now called Inside Tracker, which I'll get into. But the goal, and again, this goes back to me bugging Tom all the time, is to try to integrate all of this into Smartabase. Because what we've seen, instead of taking a top-down approach where we're sort of forcing technology on guys, we've gone for commercial off-the-shelf solutions that they'll actually buy into, and then we've sort of done the legwork on the back end to have that feed into the reporting system. So that was important for us. And the big thing here really, from my perspective, is a lot of the decisions we make when it comes to technology and apps is to differentiate with these guys the difference between training and exercise. So by the time they get to me, they've usually spent 2, 3, or 4 years in their pipeline. And a lot of these guys really have no clue what it means to train towards a goal, or to take a rest day, or to recover. And so when we sort of surround them with this technology, the goal is to teach them really, like, it's the 23, 24 hours that you spend outside of the gym that make the biggest difference. And for us, that really comes down to training versus exercise. So I won't go too much into sort of the salesmanship pitch with this, because I think a lot of you guys have similar solutions. But Train Heroic for us was our first sort of move into the technology space. And really the reason that we did it was because I was using it on my phone and I liked it. So I reached out to them and asked if they'd worked with the military before and if they could do something like this. And that was probably 3 years ago. So now at this point, all of our training for these guys goes through this app. And really that's addressed those continuity concerns. We don't really have issues anymore with guys being away on what we call TDYs, or training trips, deployments. The nice thing about this is the offline and the online capabilities. And then the other big thing, which you can sort of see here, is the daily leaderboard. So from a practitioner perspective, things like fist bumps and leaderboards seem a little bit naive, but with my guys, if we can rack and stack them and create a competitive environment, compliance will most likely go through the roof. Speaking of compliance, one of the big reports that we get with these guys is their daily compliance. And again, we will compare this when they're home, when they're deployed, when they're away on training. And we can start to paint a picture of sort of the effectiveness of the programs that we have, and we can report that back to the commander so he can make decisions on the kind of things that we need to do when we're looking at one training trip to the next. And the nice thing too at the bottom there is within this app, we can actually message these guys to say, hey, why did you only do 4 sets out of 5, or why'd you skip part B, or stuff like that. And we've found that if we can keep them accountable, they're much more likely to stick with the program and increase their compliance. Whoop. This one's contentious. I found Whoop on Instagram probably 2 years ago, and we bought 2 of them, and we started monitoring recovery and strain. And thankfully, Scott kind of went through this, so I don't need to touch too much on the details. But for our guys, the biggest thing that Whoop gave us was the gamification, if that's a word, of recovery. The data is not great. It's not the most accurate. But what we've been able to do is create a significant amount of behavioral change just simply by putting this kind of stuff in front of the guys. This gives you an example of one of the sort of reports that we get from them. Razor's Edge for us is a deployment simulation training. And we can kind of map the different fatigue levels that these guys are seeing when they're out. And then that feeds back to us to say, look, from Monday to Friday, here's what happened to HRV, here's what happened to strain, here's what happened to recovery. We aren't at a level yet where we're dictating their operational schedule with this kind of stuff, but it definitely does drive the conversation when we start to look at these training from one year to the next, from 1 month to the next. Fusionetics, again, this sort of third piece, and I'll speak for the athletic trainer here with this one. This is your standard movement screen. So contractually, we have to do the FMS, but on a more practical level, we use Fusionetics for their daily movement prescriptions. In the past, we had this functioning as a separate app. So the guys would log into this before they got on Train Heroic, and they would do whatever the prescription was. One thing that we're looking at changing though is identifying trends and actually programming those as a piece of their Train Heroic. So taking the guys out of the app, which they never wanted to use, and putting it into their sort of gym-based training. And that's new, that's within the last few weeks. One thing we did like though was the questionnaires, the refuel, the rest, and the restore. Again, just as an educational piece to get these guys thinking about the decisions that they make outside of the gym. So, like I said, question?
I was just saying it's a good wording too.
Oh, thank you. We do like Fusionetics, and like I said, the guys, it was a tough sell to get these guys to spend 10 minutes doing sort of these little exercises that they don't really connect to performance, which is one of the reasons why we're looking at trends instead. But hopefully the next time I stand in front of you guys, we'll have great success stories of how everybody has perfect movement efficiency. I doubt it. That fifth piece that I said I was going to talk about, Inside Tracker, for those of you guys that are unfamiliar, that's basically a blood-based biomarker test. We're looking at the full 42 marker panel. And really for us, because we don't have an embedded dietitian, the idea is that that piece will sort of serve as the nutritional component for these guys' behaviors. So the lessons that we learned with all of this over the past several years, number one for us, user experience is everything. So like I said, a lot of the decisions that we've made and the stuff that we've paid for, and quite frankly, the stuff that we haven't paid for, is based off what the user experience is. And for that, that really comes down to guys' thumbs on cell phones. A lot of companies approach us with these glorious looking reports and these great things that the practitioner can look at. But if the guys won't engage with it, it doesn't really matter. And I think that's a tough sell for some companies because they don't really think down to sort of the boots on the ground level. I kind of spoke on this already before, but for Whoop, for Train Heroic, a little bit for Fusionetics, what we've seen is that competition fuels compliance. So I actually have a group of guys that when they go on training trips, they'll take a TV with them so they can portray their Whoop scores and they'll compete to sleep more. Which for us was a really big deal, especially when you look at the military side of the house. Traditionally, it's been who can sleep the least. Now we have guys competing to drink less, to sleep more. And the gym, obviously, it's pretty straightforward. But competition definitely fuels compliance. This one's big, and it seems kind of obvious. But wearables don't work when guys don't wear them. And that comes down to form factor. It comes down to the different hardware components that are involved. It comes down, obviously, to durability. We get stuff slung at us all the time, like, hey, try this out, wear this, do that. Is it waterproof? Can you shoot it? Can you drop it? Will it survive in a helicopter? Blah, 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 blah. If the guys don't wear it, then you won't get any data from it. And I didn't realize how valuable real estate is on the wrist until I started working with the military. And we have guys that have things on left, right, ankles, biceps, necks. So it really comes down to, will the guys wear it? And if they will wear it, is the data going to give us something that we can work with? On more of a higher level, sort of Smartabase perspective, the stuff that we do, what I call down and in, so the daily training, the interactions with the guys, we have to be able to translate that to an effective sort of reporting system that can go up and out. Like I said, that for us, that can be as high as the Pentagon or Congress. We have to be able to justify our positions and then more importantly, justify the decisions that we make at sort of a squadron level. So aggregating all of that data and creating something that translates the down and in to the up and out is very important. We'll dwell on this one for a second because I don't think researchers like this very much. If I can't get guys to comply with something, then the great data doesn't ever really matter. This kind of goes tongue-in-cheek with the Whoop because the biggest question I get is how good is it data-wise, and the answer is really not very, but the compliance is great. So if we're looking at sleep, cool. If we're looking at strain and calories, it's not the best, but guys will literally compete on strain and calories alone, and if I can get a sort of sleep score on the back of that, awesome. So decent data and great compliance is far and away more important to me than great data with no compliance. So lastly, sort of future developments. Again, our commander signed off on a full release of Smartabase probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, so long as we de-identify our guys. So the goal is, like I said, with Tom, to synchronize the APIs with things like Whoop, Train Heroic, so that it can all feed into that. Inside Tracker is going to be a big one for us, again, looking at meal plans and nutritional decisions. Whereas Whoop sort of gamifies recovery, Inside Tracker has, for us, kind of gamified this idea of the optimized self. So if guys want to, increase their endurance, increase their sleep, increase their well-being, we can actually put a score to that and show improvement over time. And then finally, again, selfishly for me, we're looking at expanding our training facility and integrating a lot of this technology. So whether that's rack-based videos, whether that's recovery rooms, sort of to go back to this idea of an athlete, the goal is to sort of provide these guys with the resources and the space so that in their heads they can come up with this system of, look, I need to do all of these things to really improve myself on the battlefield. So that's it. I flew through it because I knew we're running out of time. But do you guys have any questions for me on any of this stuff?